set the scene for how we uncovered these findings, it's important to understand the question we were trying to answer. My interest is all about what causes people to finally pull the trigger and buy a tool. We would only talk to people that have actually purchased a solution because they've overcome the internal resistance and battled to get the budget. And from their story, we can understand how they were able to make progress, what they really valued, and which trade-offs they eventually made when choosing between different solutions. And of course, if we can understand what caused them to buy, we can then look and help others in similar situations make the same progress in future. In each of our stories, we listen for the four forces that shape their progress. The first is a push. Now, something has to change in the business environment where the old ways of working no longer cut it. And once this happens, they start to see future possibilities. This is the pull. They see a better future with your solution in it or with a data catalog in it. And they see some value and outcome that they want to achieve once the solution's up and running and doing what it needs to do for them. Of course, if it was just about push and pull, we'd all buy a lot more stuff. It's the anxiety that kills progress. That's the nagging little voice in the back of your head saying, can we afford this? Why should we buy this? Why buy this now? And reducing these anxieties helps people make more progress more quickly. There's also habits that they're giving up. These are the existing ways of working, even if they don't like them, that they need to give up if they're going to adopt your new solution. And it could be something like working overtime in the data team, because obviously we've got to get that data team to help with the selection process. And if they don't have the time, we can't give this habit up. We use Bob Mester's jobs to be done methodology, and we've got a platform that analyses these interviews. First, we interview the decision makers to unpack their story of how they came to buy a data catalogue. And we'll only talk to people that have actually purchased one, because otherwise it's things that people wish were true rather than things that actually happened. We pull out those four forces. Once we've got those four forces, we're able to identify clusters of interviewees who all shared common goals. They shared common problems they were trying to solve and common outcomes they wanted to achieve. And within each cluster, we can then detail the decision to understand what's unique about each group. What was it about this group that made them buy? How are they different to other clusters? What was it they valued? And what were the value trade-offs they were willing to make? Lastly, the details of these clusters allow us to grow market share and revenue by helping customers achieve these jobs more easily. So we'll talk about the clusters at a later stage, but how can they be implemented so that you can get more customers if you're a vendor of this technology, or so you can persuade your organisation to buy a tool if you're a data leader yourself. What really matters to our research is less about customer quotes and it's more about the progress and the struggle they're trying to make. So here's a sample from the research of what really causes decision makers to buy. The pushes here are things like a sudden surge in growth where they have so many more customer accounts, which then causes the CDO to say, look, we're stuck and we can't handle this data volume anymore. The CEO is then worried the growth they've experienced will dry up unless they get this access to data insights they need. Once this happens, the CEO can then suddenly see a need for a data catalogue that was never there before. However, they can't adopt one until they see the value a data catalogue can bring, seeing the ability to use this tool to help scale their growth using the information and have more targeted marketing, helping the data engineers work more smartly and collaboratively, making sure they don't lose their eyes. These are all terms that were used by an individual who was struggling and ended up making progress and selecting a tool. If it were just about pushes and pulls, people would make progress very quickly. What we've got to overcome is the fact that the data engineering team could keep doing this manually, but also, do we have the money or the budget to buy this right now? What is this thing in plain English? Before I can see the value in the future, I need to understand what it is. And how can I explain this to other people who are going to help me decide? Once we've analysed each individual story, we can then aggregate the pulls and the pushes together into common motivational forces. In this case, we used a Miro board and we've card sorted into 11 different pushes and 11 global pulls that represent the motivational forces driving people to change. Not every interviewee ends up in each one of these global pushes and pulls. And as you can see here, in this one, when the business has grown faster than the data team can keep up, we have just 4 different interviewees who felt that that was pushing them. We then identify clusters by looking for the similarities and differences in those global pushes and pulls. So in this case, you can see we had clusters 1 and 2 that had no real interest in having a place to collaborate on their data to help reduce data silos, whereas clusters 3 and 4 found this motivational for them. In the same way, clusters 1, 2 and 4 were pulled towards trusting their vendor and knowing that they're going to be a good partner, whereas that was unimportant for the people that were in cluster 3. Here are the 4 clusters we've identified. So the first and lowest value is help me comply. Whilst regulatory compliance is a use case for every customer of every data catalog anywhere on the planet, help me comply is just about responding to the regulatory requirement. There's nothing else. In these instances here, the fact that there was regulation was not sufficient. Firms also needed to see somebody else in their jurisdiction or a similar sized company getting penalised for falling foul of the regulation, and or have their customers demand that they're compliant with that in order to continue doing business. These are low value opportunities. It is really seen as spend as little as possible to tick the compliance box so we can move on. The next group are help me follow the plan. In these ones here, there's often been a change in senior leadership and the company has been stagnating doing its core business. They've brought in consultants who push a data-driven future, and now it's all about trying to follow the plan that that consultant has painted in order to grow the business with data insights and add money to the bottom line. In this context here, there is very little understanding of the tools. People are very disinterested in the details of the differences between them, and it's all about trusting the vendor to teach you how to fish with this new tool so that you don't hold the plan back. More interestingly is help me be more efficient. In this context, businesses have grown either by acquisition or organically, and they've eventually gotten to a scale where there are silos of data around the organisation in various different systems, and this is causing a drag on efficiency. The data team themselves are often working overtime, they're unable to meet the demand for data across the business, they're definitely not able to comply very easily with the regulations for a business their size. And management meetings become an argument fest because people are presenting different data and they're talking about inconsistent reports. This context here has the longest sales cycle. It's often very well planned because it's about efficiency. Budgets are allocated up front and you can be prepared for things to be deferred because there's almost always something slightly more important. Lastly, we've got help me keep growing, and this is all about an organisation that's used the insights in their data to drive up their growth. They've gained customers, they're gaining revenue, they're making money, and all of a sudden the data team becomes overwhelmed because of the deluge of new data coming in. When the CEO and the CMO sit down together, they're planning to keep this growth going. They want this momentum to not stop, and the data team implore them that it's not possible unless we invest in a data catalogue. In this case, budgets will be pulled forward into this year and money will be made available in order to select a tool that can help ensure the growth does not slow down. They really don't want to go slow, they want to go fast. So now you know how we ran the research, but who could use the research and how can it benefit them? Clearly, the biggest beneficiary would be the vendors of data catalogues themselves because they can understand the causal mechanisms driving customers to buy in different clusters. You can then redesign the product, you can redesign the marketing and messaging, and you can redesign the sales and onboarding process to meet the needs of each individual cluster and make it easier for them to buy, de-risking the projects for them and delivering more of the outcome they seek. The second beneficiary is the data management leaders themselves. In a lot of the interviews we had, so many of these leaders were desperate for a data catalog tool, but they were unable to communicate this with their senior leadership. And in fact, we had to scrap our first version of the research because data management leaders didn't know what it was that was going to get that key to unlock the budget. That budget comes from business decision makers. And we've used this research ourselves to write a clear guide in business-friendly language that explains what a data catalog is and what it can do for you. in terms that business people will understand. The results for this, and how once you understand the context, can really be used to help others make progress. So if we go back and talk to somebody who's yet to buy a solution, we can now ask a few simple questions to work out which cluster they're likely to be in, and then we can play back what they're looking to achieve and help them say, wow, this person really understands me. And as you can see from this comment, understanding the clusters feels like you've got inside the head of somebody. Nancy felt like she'd been interviewed just because I was able to describe the common struggle of people that had been in the same cluster she was in. The reason we adopted this approach to research was to grow our own product sales. Back in 2020, we launched our Data Management Training Academy, and we got great reviews and 10 out of 10 scores. But as you can see here, sales were terrible. And I realised there must be something wrong and investigated what causes people to say, today's the day I buy data management training. The results here blew up our revenues, and now I want to use the skills that we've got and the tools that we've built to help others do the same.